Over the last 2 decades, a powerful shift has taken place across the world. Rainbow flags fly over government buildings. Corporations redesign logos to reflect LGBT colors. Pride parades, once grassroots movements, now receive funding from Fortune 500 companies and embassies. From Canada to Kenya, from Argentina to Armenia, there's one message echoed through media, education, advertising, and law. Support for LGBT rights is the future. But here's the question no one seems to ask. Who's behind this global push? And more importantly, why? LGBT rights and protections are, without doubt, a necessary step toward equality for many. But when every government, every corporation, every global institution begins promoting the exact same message in unison, you have to ask, is this organic progress? Or part of a larger, coordinated strategy? This isn't about attacking any group. It's about investigating patterns, funding, policy alignment, and ideological synchronization. Because when we look closer, we find something curious. UN programs that directly tie LGBT policy compliance to foreign aid. Western embassies promoting LGBT ideology in socially conservative nations. Educational shifts that introduce gender identity content to children as young as 5 in countries where parents were never consulted. NGOs receiving millions in funding to reshape cultural norms worldwide. This is no longer a matter of individual freedom. It's a matter of global coordination and influence. So the question we'll explore is this. Is the LGBT movement being used, not as liberation, but as a political and ideological tool? We're not here to preach. We're here to ask what others won't. Follow the money, and you'll often find the true motive. Behind every global movement is funding. And the global LGBT movement is no exception. Let's start with international NGOs. Organizations like Open Society Foundations, the Ford Foundation, UNDP, and USAID have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into LGBT-related programs across the globe. At first glance, this looks like humanitarian support. But when these funds are tied to policy changes, education reform, and legal conditions, it becomes a form of soft power. In 2016, the U.S. government openly admitted it had funded LGBT programs in Africa and Eastern Europe, not just to promote human rights, but to encourage democratic values. But what exactly does that mean? Why would a foreign government spend money to change cultural norms in another sovereign country? Here's an example. In Uganda, after a controversial anti-LGBT law passed, the U.S. and EU threatened to cut aid unless the country reversed course. International NGOs moved in to educate and reform Ugandan society, often without local consent. And it's not just Africa. In Eastern Europe, grants have been issued to media outlets and schools on condition that they promote pro-LGBT narratives. Is that support? Or is that ideological conditioning? Even tech platforms are involved. Major companies like Google, Meta, Facebook, TikTok, and Microsoft have funded LGBT advocacy groups, boosted their content with algorithms, and censored dissenting opinions in the name of inclusion. But since when does tolerance require global enforcement? When every government, corporation, and NGO starts echoing the same slogans, funding the same programs, and rewriting laws in the same direction, we must ask, is this about rights? Or about control through ideology? The pattern is clear. Money flows from centralized sources. And with money comes influence over policy, over culture, and over how generations think. This isn't just about freedom of identity. It's about who gets to define that identity for the world. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who questions more than most. So why not join us? Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and don't miss our next deep dive. One of the most rapid and controversial areas of change tied to global LGBT advocacy is education. Across schools in the US, Canada, the UK, and parts of Europe, gender identity and sexual orientation are now introduced to children as early as preschool. Classroom materials ask 6-year-olds to question their gender. Storybooks feature non-binary characters and same-sex parents. Some schools allow students to change names and pronouns without parental notification. Supporters argue this is inclusion. Critics call it ideological indoctrination. But let's take a step back. How did such a massive shift in education happen so fast and almost simultaneously across dozens of countries? The answer: policy networks. Programs like UNESCO's Comprehensive Sexuality Education, UNICEF's Gender Identity Inclusion, and EU school standards have embedded new guidelines into school systems under the banner of human rights and anti-discrimination. These policies are often not debated publicly. They're introduced quietly through teacher training, curriculum changes, and NGO partnerships. In some cases, teachers and parents who speak out face backlash, accused of hate speech or non-compliance with diversity standards. In Canada, a teacher was suspended for refusing to use a student's chosen pronouns. In the UK, parents protesting gender content in schools were arrested. Is this education or enforcement? There is a clear top-down effort to reshape cultural norms, starting with children. Many parents are waking up to the fact that global institutions now have more influence over school content than local communities or even national governments. And that's the real question. Who decides what your children learn? A local school board or a global ideology pipeline? This is not about tolerance, it's about control of the next generation's mind. Because if you can influence how a child sees themselves and the world by the age of 7, you don't need to control adults. You've already shaped the future. What do you see when you turn on your TV, scroll your feed, or watch a movie? The same message over and over again. LGBT representation is now present in nearly every major film franchise, streaming series, advertising campaign, award show, and even sporting event. Corporations drape themselves in rainbow flags every June. News outlets frame any opposition to LGBT policies as hate, bigotry, or extremism. The result? A culture where only one viewpoint is acceptable. Media saturation. From Hollywood to Netflix, Disney to Amazon, major media giants are not just adding diversity. They're redefining narratives. Heroes in children's shows identify as non-binary. Plotlines in teen dramas normalize gender transitions. Commercials now include same-sex couples as the default. Some of this is sincere, but the uniformity suggests something more than artistic freedom, it's agenda alignment. And the push is global. Countries with little historical LGBT visibility, such as India, Mexico, or Turkey, now feature LGBT content prominently in their national media, often through international production funding or licensing deals. Social pressure and public shaming. Express a different view, even politely, and you may be labeled intolerant, fired from your job, or banned from platforms. Cancel culture now polices speech like a digital inquisition. Question school policies? You're a bigot. Say biological sex exists? You're a science denier. Refuse to update your pronouns? You're harming others. In such an environment, self-censorship becomes the norm. Digital platforms and censorship. Big tech plays a central role. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Premusk, and TikTok actively suppress dissenting views, demonetize videos, and ban content creators who question the mainstream narrative. When truth depends on what's allowed to be said, we're no longer in a free society. This isn't about protecting people anymore. It's about controlling the conversation. If there's only one side to every story, then maybe we're not hearing the truth. We're hearing what they want us to believe. Step back. Look at the full picture. Over the past 15 years, we've seen a synchronized shift in values, policies, and public behavior, not just in the West, but globally. Gender identity has become more than personal. It's become political, institutional, and untouchable. A cultural reset? Some analysts suggest we are living through a cultural reset, a rapid, coordinated rewriting of social norms under the banner of progress. Think about it. Traditional values like family, gender roles, and biological science are now framed as outdated or oppressive. New identities, pronouns, and ideologies are being inserted into laws, schools, and workplaces, often with legal backing. Institutions demand compliance, not just tolerance. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because powerful institutions pushed it globally, using media, money, policy, and fear. But why? The tools of control. When identities become fluid, so do the structures that once anchored society. If gender is subjective, who defines truth? If language changes constantly, who controls speech? If every disagreement is hate, who decides what's allowed? By destabilizing the core definitions of self, family, and morality, society becomes easier to mold. A population without shared values becomes more dependent on external authority. Some call this social engineering, the deliberate reprogramming of how people see themselves and others. And the result? Division, as people are sorted by identity groups, not shared values. Surveillance, as speech and thought are monitored for compliance. Submission as people self-censor to avoid consequences. Global governance, local silence. Across the world, governments echo the same policies from Canada to Chile, Sweden to South Korea. But this is not local culture evolving naturally. It's global governance rewriting what's acceptable and punishing those who resist. So ask yourself, is this truly liberation? Or a carefully engineered reset of society itself? Because when everyone is afraid to speak, that's when control is no longer a theory, it's a reality. So where does all this leave us? We began by asking a simple question. Is the global LGBT movement being used as a tool, not just for rights, but for influence? After examining the evidence, the funding, the policies, the media saturation, and the pressure to conform, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just a cultural shift. It's a strategic realignment of society, one that redefines identity, family, speech, and even truth itself, and does so in sync across nations, often without public debate. We are not questioning the value of personal freedom or the right to live in peace, but we are questioning who defines what freedom looks like now, and why that definition is being globally synchronized. What you're not allowed to ask. In a healthy society, you're allowed to question ideas. You're allowed to disagree. But today, simply asking questions can get you banned, labeled, fired, or silenced. Why? Since when is truth so fragile that it can't survive doubt? If a narrative can't withstand scrutiny, is it truth? Or is it programming? What happens next? That depends on you. If we remain silent, the definitions of identity, morality, and reality will continue to be written by centralized powers, corporations, institutions, and unelected agencies. But if we speak, if we question, if we think for ourselves, then maybe we reclaim something deeper. Our right to disagree. Our right to raise our children. Our right to define what it means to be human. This isn't a war on LGBT people. It's a warning about what happens when movements are used by power structures to reshape the world from the top down. You don't have to believe everything in this video, but if even one part of it made you think, then the conversation has already begun. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And remember, when you're told not to ask the question, that's usually the one that matters most.